Back, everyone. We will continue on with outcome 5, program 5.1, and we will go to Senator Bligh.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair. I just had some questions in relation to the gambling harms report. And I'll sort of start with a quote from the Communications Minister on the promise to respond to this report. And that was, we will be forward-looking and comprehensive, we will get this right, and we will get this done, and it will have a measurable difference on gambling harms in this country. I guess my question for the department is, when did you guys first hear about the plans to give up on the gambling advertising?
Senator, there's no plan such that you've described it. The government remains committed to tackling the unacceptable levels of harm associated with online wagering advertising. The Minister's comments in that regard are entirely consistent with the government's strong commitment to working through those recommendations, consulting on a proposed model, and rolling out reforms to tackle that harm. So where exactly are you up to on that? Because I think we were sort of promised something by the end of the term. We're working through various options to address both the recommendations and the harms associated with online gambling advertising. So that's just work that the team is actively doing. We're considering feedback from industry, and we anticipate being ready to implement that when the government chooses to do so.
Okay, and so the ABC, they reported in November last year that government sources had told them that the contentious bill to restrict the advertising basically was not going to be proceeding and had been abandoned. So that's not correct, those reports? We
haven't received any advice on that from our minister or within government. We're continuing to work on the reforms. We're aware of the media comments, but they're not comments that have been given to us. Okay.
Did the minister want to add any comments to that question?
I think Mr Chisholm has answered your question.
Okay. So I guess in terms of the department's readiness, so basically you've been instructed to be ready to go whoever wins the next election with a plan to roll out?
By whoever wins, we would be responding to the government of the day on what they wish to do on wagering reforms.
Yep. Okay, thank you. That's all.
Just on, you mentioned that you were examining various options.
Senator Bligh, are you handing your call over to Senator Henderson?
I have, yes, sorry.
Sorry, Chair. Sorry. Yes.
Senator Henderson.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the options you raised, what are those options, Mr Chisholm? Could you summarise those, please, what they are?
I think there have been some reports about areas of focus. For
not.
Reforms.
I'm just asking about the options that you're considering.
The government hasn't yet announced a package. What it is focused on is how to reduce.
Just I apologise for interrupting, but I didn't ask about the government's announcement. I asked about what are the options the department is currently considering, to which you referred in one of your previous answers.
So obviously at the heart of it is looking at ways to reduce wagering advertising during sport, live sport. There are also a range of other forms of wagering advertising that the Murphy report looked at in relation to things like stadia advertising, advertising online, on platforms. We're looking at all those issues to be in a position to respond. But
there's no, Mr Chisholm, there's no action, and maybe I can just refer to the Minister. Minister, there's been absolutely no action on gambling reform. The government did not even support our private member's bill and Senator's bill to impose a ban on advertising for 1 hour before and after live sport, which shows, frankly, a pathetic commitment to any sort of reform. Isn't it the case that you've completely dropped the ball?
Senator, no, and it's not correct to say that there's been no action on dealing with harms associated with gambling. And we've talked about this often in the Senate. I've spoken about it in question time. But I'd point you, for example, to BetStop. I mean, at the end of January this year, 37,000 Australians have registered to use it since it was launched. On average, over the past year, that's more than 1,600.
Minister, I'm sorry to interrupt
That's
because we haven't got much time.
almost 400 per
Senator
week
Henderson,
and more than 50 per week. So it's just not correct to say that no action has been taken. In fact, the government has done more in one term than your government achieved in a number of terms to actually address harms associated with gambling.
Well, Minister, we've just
the government does remain committed to dealing with this one question, which is around advertising of online wagering. And we recognise that it's taking longer than we hoped, but we are working through it and working through the feedback
Minister,
that we're
it's
receiving.
taken all of this term and there is still no action, and that was what I was referring to when I made reference to the fact that there's been no action. Why didn't the government support the opposition's very sensible legislation which would have seen advertising during live sport, including 1 hour before and 1 hour afterwards, banned? Why didn't the government recognise that this was sensible reform and support us in a bipartisan manner?
Senator, the minister's been very clear that we intend to do this and to do this well. And
You're not doing anything, Minister. It's a disaster.
May I finish my answer? And I would point you to the reforms that were undertaken under the previous government. So in 2018, the Liberals introduced
I'm
reform,
asking about
and
your government,
beyond
sorry,
that
Minister.
point, there was a 50% increase in the total volume of gambling spots on television and radio. There was an 86% increase on regional
Sorry,
TV.
just on direct
and I
relevance,
point to
Minister.
that. It is relevant,
I'm asking
Senator.
about your
May I
performance.
Senator
continue?
Henderson, you've asked a question. Allow the
Yes,
minister
and
to
on direct relevance,
finish.
Chair, I just asked that the Minister address the question.
Well, I would say that she is addressing the question by nature of how you
asking about-
characterised it. The minister will finish her answer.
It's relevant, Senator, because there are unintended consequences. There can be unintended consequences when you undertake reform without thinking it through. And the government has been working to understand the best way to intervene in this complex policy area in a way that produces the outcome that we want. And we've been really clear about what those outcomes are. It's about the nexus between wagering and sport. It's about reducing the exposure of children to online wagering advertising. And it's about tackling the saturation and targeting of wagering ads. Now, it is complex, and it is possible, as the example I provided to you demonstrates, for reforms to have consequences that you don't expect. And for that reason, the government is taking the time to work through this and to understand it and to get it right.
Can I ask about the draft rules for the social media ban, a very proud initiative of the Coalition, banning social media for under 16s? Would it be possible to provide the committee with a copy of those draft rules, please?
Well, I will, I suppose, raise the question just in relation to your preamble. The Coalition was obviously in power for 9 years and didn't do this, so it's difficult to see how this could be characterised as a proud policy legacy for the Coalition.
Because I'll explain
but
that.
I will ask officials.
I will address that because
ask officials to provide an answer to the question you asked about to provide an update on the development of the rules.
No, that wasn't my question, Minister.
It was actually.
My question was, could you please provide the committee with a copy of the draft rules?
Senator Andrew Irwin, Assistant Secretary, Online Safety Branch. We can provide those on notice, yes.
Can you provide them now, please?
I think the official's taken it on notice, Senator, and he's quite
No,
entitled to
I'm
do
sorry.
so.
I'm sorry, Minister.
We'll just locate one for you.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary. I understand it might take a bit of time, but if Mr Irwin could, as soon as convenient, locate a copy of those draft rules and so we can distribute them to the committee, that would be very much welcome. Mr Irwin,
We're providing now, Senator.
Oh, thank you very much. So can you give please the committee an update on your consultation, including in relation to the draft rules? And has the government entered into any NDAs at all in relation to this consultation?
Thanks, Senator. Sarah Vandenbroek, First Assistant Secretary. We have commenced consultation. We're working through that. We still have a number of roundtables and individual consultations to go. There haven't been any NDAs entered into as part of that process.
And can you please provide more detail on that consultation? Where are you up to, and will you meet your timeline in terms of implementing an under-16s social media ban?
We believe we will meet the timeline to have the ban active by the 10th of December, which is the deadline, being 12 months from when the legislation came into effect. I'll ask Mr Irwin to go through the consultation program in more detail. We are working through that. We have a couple of weeks to go. We do expect after that we would provide advice to the Minister and that the rules will be made at some point in the first half of this year in order for the E-Safety Commissioner to then be able to issue guidance to industry on how that will be implemented.
So it is required that the social media or tech platforms must take reasonable steps to implement a social media ban.
That's
by
correct.
the 10th of December. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's correct.
And what does reasonable steps mean, please?
That will be worked through over the next few months. There is the technology trial underway to trial the effectiveness of different technologies already being used, and the results of that trial will inform guidance that the E-Safety Commissioner will issue in regards to reasonable steps.
Can you outline which platforms will be exempt from this legislation or services?
Yeah, so it will be platforms that are for messaging or online gaming or primarily for the purposes of health and education.
And can you name those platforms? So
we have been working through with platforms. With the major platforms, it's quite clear which ones are in and which ones are out. With some of the smaller ones, we're working with them to better understand their offering and where they sit.
Okay, so you say it's quite clear. Could you please provide that information to the committee?
Do we have a list?
We don't have a finalised list. We're currently consulting on the rules and taking stakeholder feedback. So what the rules are, which provide those exclusion categories that Ms Vandenbroek went through,
Ms. Vandenbroek,
is yet to be settled.
Last question,
Thank
Senator
you.
Henderson.
Ms Vandenbroek, you've said it's quite clear which platforms of the larger ones are in and out. So YouTube is one, for instance.
Yes.
Are there any others that will be exempt from the legislation?
Not specifically. YouTube is the only one that's been specifically named in the draft rule. The others are the ones that meet the definition of being solely or primarily for messaging or gaming, or solely or primarily for the purposes of health or education.
And I just want to also...
Senator Henderson, I'm going to rotate.
Your last question. Minister, just to correct the record on something you said earlier, Mr Dutton prosecuted the need for a social media ban for many, many months before this was adopted by the government. And I think it's fair to say that we have seen increasing levels of harm suffered by young Australians, increasing evidence of terrible harm, whether including, of course, shocking incidents of suicide, of eating disorders and the like. And so the Coalition has led the charge in relation to this ban. But my final question to you, Minister, is are you confident that this will be in place by the 10th of December?
Senator, just in relation to your comments about getting things done, I mean, plainly the government did the work necessary to establish a legislative framework that could protect children from the harms that you refer to. And I draw your attention to the fact that you're in the chamber and I was in the chamber. There were a range of Coalition MPs who actively prosecuted the case against these reforms. It's a very big contrast to the Labor caucus, who were universally supportive of these reforms, and it's not clear to me what the position is of many of your colleagues on these questions. The official has given you advice about the implementation timetable and her assessment that it will be possible to have it in place within the 12 months as anticipated.
Thanks,
Senator Billick.
Thank you. I just want to go back to the on-farm connectivity program that was mentioned before we broke for the tea break. able to... Sorry, I'll just give you a minute to get sorted. Are you able to tell me what the level of interest in this from the primary producer and farmers has been like?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, so those 2 rounds I mentioned of the on-farm connectivity program have been conducted. There was a very, very high level of interest, particularly in the second round. Mr. Lange might be able to take you through some numbers about the second round that was recently
and
conducted.
if you've got any examples, that would be really helpful too.
Yeah, and just before the witnesses do that, Senator, this has been an incredibly successful program. The program is focused on increasing uptake of agtech and other connectivity solutions in the sector by primary producers in relation to fisheries and forestry, and it provides rebates and supports for eligible equipment. So, yeah, we're really excited at how successful this has been, but I'll ask Mr. Lange to speak at further length on it.
Jason Lange, Assistant Secretary, Regional Connectivity Branch. Very, very successful second round of the on-farm connectivity program. So there was well over 2,000 applications were received as part of that program, which was funded to $18 million in total. I haven't got any actual individual case studies with me, but that's definitely something we could provide pretty rapidly, Senator.
Sorry, and that was for round 2 or round 3?
So round 1 and 2 have been announced and completed. Round 3 was announced by the Minister late last year to occur later in 2025. So there's 3 rounds in total, 2 rounds have been completed.
Sorry, I've got my glasses on, I still can't see your name tag. Would you like to add anything?
Senator, I just note, so we certainly will provide some very successful case studies on notice. I would note also that the Regional Tech Hub, which is also funded under the Better Connectivity Plan we were just discussing, has published some case studies on its website of specific farmers and primary producers who've benefited from the new connectivity, particularly the productivity gains that they've been able to find through the rebates that have been provided through this program. So, for example, primary producers who no longer have to drive a couple of 100 kilometres to check the level in a dam, or to check whether a gate is operating correctly, or to weigh cattle or to count stock. Instead, they're able to do this remotely due to the equipment that's been provided through the program. So it has been very successful, and that's why the government has announced a 3rd round to run later in 2025, and there's 20 million allocated to that 3rd round.
How much?
20 million.
Right, great, thanks. Just with all of these programs, is there any sort of kind of theme in terms of consumer need that the programs are particularly focused on responding to?
So, Senator, there's as we were discussing, there's a wide range of initiatives under the Better Connectivity Plan, but I think you could say all of them are directed towards narrowing the digital divide between those in the cities and those living in regional, rural and remote communities. There's a level of constancy of connectivity and speed and reliability of connectivity that people have become used to in the cities that is often lacking in regional, rural and remote areas. These funding programs are all designed to co-invest with industry, to incentivise industry to fill those gaps and make sure that the experience of those living in our regional communities, whether it's to participate in online banking, to connect with their friends and family, to understand what's happening during an emergency, that they have a level of connectivity that's commensurate with what people experience in the city. So that's broadly what the programs are driving at.
And I think it's worth observing, Senator, that in this particular program in relation to farming, this was actually a recommendation made in 2021 under the Independent Regional Telecommunications Review. That, of course, was a recommendation that was ignored by the Coalition. There's a lot of talk about the commitment to regional communities, a lot of talk about commitment to primary producers, but when a practical, sensible recommendation is made to them by an independent reviewer, absolutely nothing. As the official has described to you, we are very committed to making sure that primary producers enjoy the benefits of the digital revolution and are capable of participating in it. And there's a range of other ways that we're supporting regional communities to improve their connectivity as well.
Thank you. We'll go to Senator Hanson-Young.
Well, thank you. First, I just want to follow up on this question on this announcement the Minister's made this morning in relation to Starlink and the universal obligations incentive for outdoor mobile. I'd just like to know, when did the department start working on this project?
Oh, Senator, we've been working on this for quite some time. I would need to check with my colleagues on a time frame, but I've been the Deputy Secretary for this group for nearly a year, and this has been work certainly ongoing before I started. Mm-hmm. So yeah, this has been a long lead time.
Was it envisaged that this policy would have been put forward prior to the election originally? I mean, you've been working on it for so long. Why is it a promise for afterwards, after the next election?
I don't quite understand the question. Do you mind just...
So you've been working on it for over a year, is what you're saying to me?
Yeah, I think it's been, certainly at least a year, yeah.
Okay. And there was a task force. You mentioned some group.
There's a LEOSATS working group, but that's primarily industry-facing
Mm-hmm.
working group. It didn't develop the policy. The policy was developed by government, but informed by inputs such as the thinking from both the working group report and the D.I.T.R.D.C.A report that we referred to earlier, and also it's nested within that broader suite of universal services reforms. Yep.
So when was the working group formed?
It was formed in 2022. We'll just check the exact date, but 2022.
I have already also asked who's on the group. If you've taken
We've got
that on
that.
notice.
We can table that actually.
Yeah. Okay. And is this the only project that this working group works on, or are there other issues?
So, Senator, just to clarify, the working group didn't work on this. The working group is a broad industry working group for LEOSAT technology.
Yep.
And so it's looked at everything from how we ensure LEOSATs are fit for purpose in the context of weather events, how LEOSATs relate to supporting regional communities, farming technology. We've had discussions about, for example, at a recent meeting we had a presentation from Starlink about the work that it did in support of the LA fires response.
When was that? When was that meeting?
Oh, that was earlier this month. Yeah, February. Again, I'm just checking on dates with my colleagues, but it was just a few weeks ago. Yeah.
Okay. We can have a specific date for that meeting where you were briefed by Starlink. That would be good.
Yeah. But the working group representatives include a number of industry representatives, the Communications Alliance,
Thanks,
some of the
Mr.
companies
Chisholm.
I mentioned before who are also in the
I'm on
LEOSAT
limited
space.
time, and I've asked for the list to be tabled, so that's fine. I'll just keep asking some questions if we can get through them. When was this working group first briefed or consulted on in relation to this particular project?
We didn't brief the working group on this project.
When was the first time this working group became aware of this project as it's been announced this morning?
My colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is it would have been when the announcement was made. Yeah. So
today.
Would that be right? Yep.
Sorry, Senator Lisa.
That's okay.
The members of the working group would have been made aware in their individual capacities. Supporting what Mr. Chisholm said, the terms of reference of the working group are broader than just a mobile USO.
I understand that. I'm wondering and want to know when they discussed or briefed or were consulted in relation to this project.
Senator, one thing that's probably worth bearing in mind, and I touched on it earlier, is that a number of the members of the working group have their own commercial relationships in relation to this technology. So one of the things we have to be careful about when engaging through the working group is being mindful of those commercial sensitivities. Hence, what's really important is that they all find out at the same time about government policy announcements.
Okay. So there wasn't any...
We don't want to give any particular participants advantages.
So there was no discussion within the working group about this new incentive prior to this morning?
We've obviously discussed the technology and the direction in which this is heading, but we didn't discuss this specific policy.
Okay, fair enough. But this specific policy has been in the works for over a year.
Yeah.
So, Senator, can I add to Mr Chisholm's comment? The need for mobile coverage or the capacity to connect outside of traditional mobile networks is something that has come up quite regularly through the consultation process on universal service obligation reform. And it was quite clear that it was a concern in the context of the 3G shutdown.
Yes.
And at a recent committee appearance, we were asked questions around when this technology would be available more broadly in Australia. So it's something that has been part of our consideration and consultation for some time. Ms Power, did you want to add to that?
Yes, so just to give you a sense of the broader consultation that's been happening and where this arose from. So that first started in October 2023. The government first announced that it wanted to look at the future of universal service arrangements and consider what services a future universal service obligation should cover. And so that discussion paper that was released, to which there was sort of broad responses from both industry and regional and other stakeholders, did ask the question, what role did you see mobile services playing in a future USO? So the feedback through that, as well as other processes such as the Regional Telecommunications Review, was sort of the derivation of where that work considered to how it could play a role, noting that clearly mobile technology is becoming a very preferred form of connectivity.
I can see there's obviously a gap there. Could I ask, the briefing from Starlink, which you'll get the exact date for me with, who proposed that Starlink brief that group? Was that by an industry member on the working group? Was that proposed by the government? Who proposed that Starlink would brief?
Yeah, we requested it actually.
You requested it. You requested it directly to Starlink themselves?
Yeah.
Could I have a copy of that correspondence, please?
Senator, I will take that on notice.
Thank you.
How we communicated with them. Can I also confirm that that meeting was on the 11th of February?
Great.
And it was
Thank you.
around understanding the experiences that they'd had in the US, including regulatory approaches in light of the recent bushfires.
Has there been any other meetings with Starlink and the department?
They're a member of the working group.
As a member of the working group, so we've met, well, certainly in the last 12 months, I think the working group has met about 3 times. And then separate meetings with Starlink, we would have to take on notice.
Okay. I'm happy for you to take that on notice.
I don't think there's been... Yeah.
Okay.
Take on notice, yeah.
Happy for you to take that on notice, including any meeting the minister or minister's office has a very quick question online.
Okay, I'm just going to be really clear. The committee decided in its private meeting to stick to time, so we will be concluding this session at 11:30. That was the decision of the committee. Senator Cox, if you could be as swift as you can, that would be great.
Chair, I have a question in relation to First Nations digital inclusion, closing the gap target number 17.
Senator.
Thank you. I just wanted a quick update on progress, given that this target is one of the first that are due in 2026, and achieving equity for or equal levels of digital inclusion for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across Australia. Could you give us an update on the latest 68 million that was allocated in the 2024-25 budget?
Yes, Senator, I'll ask my colleagues to speak to that in a bit more detail, but the most recent update is that we've now released program guidelines for the First Nation digital inclusion programs. They were developed very closely with the First Nations Digital Inclusion Advisory Group, the Department and the NIAA, and that's been the culmination of 2 years of really great work with communities and those organisations. The guidelines are for the programs that also complement the existing community Wi-Fi mesh networks that have been rolled out by NBN in a number of communities over the last year. That was funding announced in February of 2024. And
Mr Chisholm, that was the 23 communities, was it?
Yeah, so 19 of the 23 communities have now got active services as part of that work. But I'll ask...
how are they determined?
I'll ask Mr Ashurst to speak to that.
Those list of communities were determined through consultation with the First Nations Digital Inclusion Advisory Group, as well as states and territories, and ultimately the communities themselves, whether they wish to participate in that program.
Okay, great, thank you. Sorry, I know I'm on limited time. Just in relation to the improving of the national collection of data on First Nations inclusion, is this the money that went to RMIT for the $6 million?
Yes, Senator. Jason Ashurst here, Assistant Secretary of the Digital Inclusion Deployment Branch. $6 million has been allocated to RMIT under a grant arrangement.
Okay. Is this new work, Mr Ashurst, or is this continuation of the work from the previous IDN that was established alongside community-controlled organisations, University of Melbourne, ANU, IATSIS, and the National Network of Community-Controlled orgs in order to ensure that work had already commenced? Is this new work that you're now funding RMIT for?
It is in effect new work, but it builds on the Australian Digital Inclusion Index work, which they've been undertaking over a number of years now, and it's to supplement that index to provide greater granularity of First Nations communities and Australians.
So just one final question, how are you achieving data sovereignty then?
Through a number of mechanisms, but in particular RMIT is engaging closely with some of the organisations you've previously mentioned there, as well as employing First Nations representatives within RMIT, but also in community to help support data collection, analysis and distribution after the data.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Cadell.
Speed dating, I'll go as quickly as I can through stuff. Department SBS relocation. We're now building not a full relocation, but it's a production facility, is my understanding. Is that correct?
That's right, Senator, yeah.
Do you have an understanding of facilities and staff? Do we know percentage of staff or numbers of staff that will be relocating out of the employment of SBS under this?
I'll ask Ms Lopez and Ms Gannett to assist you with that, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator, sorry, can you repeat that question? It was about
from the percentage of staff employed in SBS, do we have numbers that are moving, numbers that are not moving?
No, Senator. In terms of the new project, that's an establishment of a additional facility.
Right.
In terms of that production hub, and it's probably a bit too preliminary in terms of identifying which staff would be affected by those new facilities.
There's no ballpark that's 10, 20, 100, 50%, nothing?
No, Senator.
Okay. When will the new facility be open?
Senator, at this stage, what is being proposed is that SBS be developing a business case for establishing that new facility, and that will be the aim is for that to be delivered by the end of this year.
So it's not actually finalised that it will happen? They still have to do a business case?
That's correct.
Right, so no decision has been made to go ahead with the Western production facility?
Senator Bridget Gannon, First Assistant Secretary, Media Policy. SBS has been funded to undertake a business case, as Ms Lopez said, that comes out of work that the department led over the last 2 years on a feasibility study for a relocation of SBS. SBS has received funding over 2 years to undertake the business case, which gives you the timeline for the business case, but they are leading that work, and I'd suggest that questions about the timeframes and their program of work be directed to SBS.
In a previous life, I did a business case for a $2.7 billion container terminal in 18 months. How come it takes 2 years to build a shed? 2 years for a business case to build a shed?
Senator, the funding...
More than a shed.
It's a production facility. It's not a $2.7 billion container terminal, is it?
Senator, the funding's been provided over 2 financial years, but the questions about the work program are best directed to SBS.
Okay. So we had a promise of the previous government that would look at relocating SBS's headquarters. That's come down to a proposal to do a business case on moving building a production hub in Western Sydney. Is that right?
That was what the government announced on the 8th of December.
Happy with that. Thank you very much. Next, very quickly on to just touching on the on-farm connectivity program again. Won't be, by the time you get here, the question will be answered, I'm sure. Said it was very successful. My understanding is that November 8, the plans opened. National Farmers Federation by November 12 had an information session to help people with their things. They had to shut that down even before it happened because it was oversubscribed within 3 days. Is that correct?
The program was fully subscribed very quickly, Senator. Yeah, very quickly.
NFF cancelled their information brief because it was already oversubscribed, I was told.
I think it's fair to say we didn't quite anticipate how popular it would be.
Because the first one took 6 months to fill, didn't it?
Yeah, so we have definitely taken that on board for future rollouts, but the strength and the volume of applications was like nothing we've seen before.
Okay.
And round 2 was larger in financial quantum than round 1. So it was really that the program had obviously generated quite a lot of traction in round 1 and there was very high levels of interest.
Round 3, I think last time we were here there wasn't a round 3 on the books that's been announced. Where is the funding for that coming from?
So, Senator, that's $20 million that the government has announced within the Better Connectivity Plan funding envelope.
Right.
And that the Minister announced that would be run later this year following some consultation, partly, Senator, to deal with exactly the questions you were just raising about the rate at which the program was subscribed to. So we'll be doing some further consultation with industry, and indeed we've already commenced that consultation.
And where has that been really prioritised within an envelope? Was that just spare money sitting around, or we've had to take it from another program?
Senator, we've got... So the $20 million for that was within the BCP, the Better Connectivity Plan allocation. I'll just have to check on notice for you, Senator, exactly what that was previously
which mini bucket
allocated to, but it was certainly within the Better Connectivity Plan.
Understood. Thank you very much. That's all I have on that one. Thank you very much. And just questioning misinformation bill, if I can get in the last 5 minutes. I'm going as quickly as I can so we can keep the time.
You're doing very well.
And as is the department. Thank you very much.
It's like speed dating.
It is. Misinformation bill disappeared from the papers last year here. Did the department recommend that it be pulled from the legislative program?
Well, I think the government was very clear about the reasons it was pulled. There was no pathway forward for this bill in the Senate, and it was on that basis that the government decided not to proceed with the bill.
I understand. Did the department advise that the bill be withdrawn?
Well, the department generally, as a general rule, the approach we take in the chamber is obviously informed by our relationships within the chamber, that those are held by government senators. But I'll ask Mr Chisholm whether he provided any additional advice.
We don't routinely provide advice to government on what it wishes to do with bills that are before the chamber. That's a matter for... I think the Minister has answered the question in the sense that it's a matter for government how it wishes to manage the passage of
I accept
bills.
That's what happened, and I accept you don't routinely did it. Did you do it on this occasion?
Senator, we were supporting the government on the consideration of the bill, and that was our focus rather than whether or not the government would choose to progress with the bill or not.
This is a pretty clear thing. I accept that the government chose not to do it. It's their decision. Did you advise the government, yes or no, to not proceed with the bill?
And again, Senator, we just don't provide that advice.
You didn't? That's fine. Yeah. So you didn't provide that advice? Okay, I'll take that. The bill is sitting somewhere. What's the status of the bill now? Just sitting in a pile?
The government has been very clear on its position with respect to the bill. There is no intention to reintroduce it.
Right.
But that, of course, is a matter for government.
There's a question on notice, departmental question number SQ240145, question 182, which I refer to. How much did the department spend on the exercise of the misinformation bill?
Okay, so I'll just check with my colleagues on that.
SQ240145.
Senator, yeah.
145.
Yep. Yes. I'm pretending like I drank 3 Pepsi Maxes instead of 2.
Bear with us, Senator, while we track it.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I think it said $80,000 from Clayton News to work out whether people like the misinformation bill.
Oh, yeah, yes. And that was in relation to we received how many submissions?
Over 2,000 submissions and 20,000 over 20,000 comments.
So Clayton News assisted us with a document management exercise. Just the sheer volume of submissions was such that we got that support.
And so it's Andrew Hole's Assistant Secretary, Platforms, Digital Platforms Branch. It's important to note that Clayton Utes didn't review the whole thing. We were only asking them to do a portion of a review. Hence the reason why we only got them to look at 1,100 files.
How were they selected?
How were they selected?
Yeah, was it a random sample or was it particular ones of concern? Or
it was the ones that were remaining outstanding to be reviewed.
Right, so you'd done the other thing, you passed it. What did they say? Did people like the bill?
Sorry, mixed review, Senator.
A mixed review. Yeah. How often do we use external sources to review consultations and submissions?
Oh, that's something that, certainly from my memory, that's it's not common that we would do that, but it's also not common that we would get thousands of submissions. So it was a sheer workload management issue for staff to bring that expertise on. It's a bit like if you engage a law firm to assist with document management exercises in other contexts. They've got that expertise, and that really helped us to get through them swiftly.
Okay. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Final question to Senator Darmanin.
Thank you. Just quickly, I wondered if you could talk a bit about the consumer safeguards legislation. So specifically, with the introduction of the legislation to Parliament quite recently, can you tell us a bit more about it, including any gaps or challenges in the laws protecting telco consumers at the moment, and therefore what this legislation is really seeking to address?
Absolutely, Senator. And before my colleagues speak to that in a bit more detail, the telecommunications consumer safeguards are part of a broader framework that has been a strong focus for the Minister. This includes action on domestic violence, family and sexual violence, financial hardship, customer communication and complaints. And these have been made directly enforceable through our work with ACMA. And there's also been the establishment of a registration scheme, and we're closely monitoring that work. But I will ask, and it should be seen in the context of the scam work that we're doing as well, which is also strong consumer work. But I'll ask Mr Grunhard and Ms Saleri to speak to that.
Thank you, Senator. So, yes, you'll be aware the bill was introduced into the House a couple of weeks ago. The bill targets a couple of weaknesses in the existing framework, particularly, as Mr Chisholm mentioned, following quite a bit of consultation with the public and with industry, a registration scheme for carriage service providers, which will allow much better oversight of who is entering the market and whether they're operating consistent with the rules that are there for carriage service providers. But it also particularly targets some deficiencies in the penalties and the breaches that can be applied to carriers and carriage service providers. I might ask Ms Soleri just to quickly run through that.
Thank you, Mr Grunhard. Kathleen Soleri, Assistant Secretary, Consumer Safeguards Branch. The Consumer Safeguards Reform, particularly the Telecommunications Enhancing Consumer Safeguards Bill, had 4 key elements, some of which Mr Grunhard and Mr Chisholm have touched on. The first element was to make Part 6 codes directly enforceable, rather than the ACMA having to go through a 2-step process to enforce those codes. The second element was around increasing reforming penalties for breaches of codes and standards, and service provider determinations. The third element was adjusting the infringement notice provisions across a number of applicable breaches. And the last one was the establishment of a carriage service provider registration scheme.
It's probably worth, some of those reforms, they're really significant in a consumer protection context because they are bringing telecommunications consumer safeguards up to speed with what we see in the Competition and Consumer Act and in other consumer protection provisions. At the moment, ACMA does need to go through, as Ms Soleri said, this 2-step process in relation to codes. So you have to have an industry code in place first.
The industry code is in place.
Yes.
And nominally, it's voluntary to comply. The ACMA can say, we think you're in non-compliance, and then they have another go to confirm they're compliant. If they don't, the ACMA can then find a breach of that provision. This amendment would make it 1 step.
Yeah.
So they would just be able to
Easier
say,
for consumers.
you're in breach. Yeah.
Easier for consumers.
Thank you.
And much more streamlined in terms of regulatory compliance.
Thank you. And with that, we will conclude program 5.1, and we will thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate it. And I will now